July 16th, 1945. A stretch of New Mexico desert so remote, the government had to invent a fake name for it just to put it on a map. A small group of scientists lay flat on the ground behind a ridge, waiting. Some wore welding goggles. One of them, the physicist Edward Teller, went a step further. He put on a second pair of dark glasses over the first and rubbed suntan lotion onto his face and hands. He wasn't worried about a sunburn. He was worried about something far stranger. That the flash from the explosion would carry enough ultraviolet radiation to burn exposed skin in an instant, the way staring directly into a welding arc can. At 5:29 in the morning, the sky over the Jornada del Muerto, Spanish for the journey of the dead man, turned brighter than the sun itself. The first atomic bomb in human history had just been tested. Robert Oppenheimer would later say a line from Hindu scripture ran through his mind in that moment. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But among the men lying in that desert, watching the birth of the nuclear age, was someone with a very different reaction. He was calm, methodical, already thinking about how he'd describe what he'd just seen, not to his American commanders, not to his British superiors, but to a stranger he'd meet in a few weeks on a street corner in Santa Fe. A man who would carry his words all the way to Moscow. His name was Klaus Fuchs, and by the time the world found out who he really was, he had already handed Joseph Stalin the blueprint to the most destructive weapon ever built. This is the story of how one quiet, brilliant physicist walked into the most secretive project in American history, and walked out having changed the balance of global power forever. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand why Klaus Fuchs did what he did, you have to understand what he survived before he ever set foot in America. Klaus Emil Julius Fuchs was born on December 29, 1911, in a small German town called Rüsselsheim. His father was a Lutheran pastor, a deeply religious man who preached something unusual for the time, that faith demanded social justice, that a good Christian could not simply watch the poor suffer and stay silent. It was a household built on conviction. And convictions in the Fuchs family weren't something you kept quiet about. They were something you acted on, whatever the cost. That philosophy would shape every major decision of Klaus Fuchs's life, for better and for worse. As a young man, Fuchs studied mathematics and physics at the University of Leipzig. Germany in the early 1930s was a nation coming apart at the seams. The economy was in ruins. Political violence was a daily reality. And on the streets, two forces were fighting for the soul of the country: the rising Nazi movement and the socialist and communist parties trying to stop it. Fuchs, following his father's belief in social justice, joined the youth wing of the Social Democratic Party. He marched, he argued, he believed, with the total conviction of a young idealist, that fascism could be defeated through political organizing. Then, in 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. And almost overnight, the rules changed. The Nazis moved fast against anyone tied to the political left. Fuchs, marked as a known socialist agitator, was in real danger. In the chaos of that year, Fuchs made a decision that would define the rest of his life. If the moderate socialists couldn't stop the Nazis, maybe the communists could. He joined the German Communist Party. It was a decision made in fear and in fury by a 21-year-old watching his country burn. He had no way of knowing that this single choice, made in a Germany that no longer exists, against an enemy that would soon be defeated, would eventually make him one of the most consequential spies of the 20th century. The Nazis didn't waste time hunting their political enemies. Fuchs's own father was arrested. Fuchs went into hiding, moving from safe house to safe house, never sleeping in one place too long. Then, in the fall of 1933, he did what tens of thousands of German refugees were doing. He fled, across the border into France, then onward to England. He arrived with almost nothing. No money, barely any English, a physics education interrupted by political catastrophe. But Klaus Fuchs was, by every account, an extraordinary mind. The kind of mind that could hold enormously complex mathematical structures in his head and approach physics with quiet, relentless precision. At the University of Bristol, he came under the mentorship of the physicist Neville Mott, who recognized the young refugee's talent almost immediately. Fuchs earned his PhD, that's PhD in 1937. He moved on to the University of Edinburgh, working under another towering figure in physics, Max Born, and built a reputation as one of the sharpest theoretical minds of his generation. For a few years, it looked like Fuchs might simply become another footnote in the long history of brilliant European scientists who fled fascism and found a quiet academic life in Britain. Then the war came, and everything changed again. When World War II broke out in 1939, Britain did something that seems almost unthinkable in hindsight. It rounded up thousands of German and Austrian refugees, many of them, like Fuchs, fierce opponents of the Nazi regime, and interned them as enemy aliens. Fuchs spent months behind barbed wire, first in England, then shipped across the ocean to a camp in Canada. Think about the injustice of that for a moment. A man who had fled Hitler, who had lost his freedom and nearly his life opposing fascism, locked up by the very country he'd sought refuge in, simply because of the passport he carried. It didn't last. The British government realized it was wasting valuable scientific talent, and by early 1941, Fuchs was released and brought back to Britain. And this is where his story takes the turn that would echo through the rest of the century. The physicist Rudolf Peierls, a fellow German refugee, invited Fuchs to join a secretive research group. Britain, terrified that Nazi Germany might be racing to build an atomic weapon, had launched its own atomic bomb feasibility project, codenamed the Maud Committee, which later evolved into a program called Tube Alloys. Peierls needed a mind like Fuchs's. He brought him in. Fuchs even lived with the Peierls family for a time, eating dinner with their children, becoming something close to family. In 1942, Fuchs became a naturalized British citizen. He took an oath of allegiance to the crown. On paper, Klaus Fuchs was now a loyal British subject, working on one of the most classified scientific projects on Earth. But something else was happening beneath the surface. As Fuchs began to understand the true, staggering power of the weapon he was helping build, his old political convictions resurfaced with new urgency. He was a committed communist who believed, with total sincerity, that no single nation should ever hold a monopoly on a weapon capable of ending the world. If only the West had the bomb, he reasoned, the world would tilt permanently off balance. The only way to keep it stable, in his mind, was to make sure the Soviet Union had the bomb too. It's worth pausing here, because this is the part of the story people often get wrong. Klaus Fuchs was not selling secrets for money. He never took a payment for what he did. He wasn't being blackmailed. He wasn't seeking revenge. In his own mind, he believed he was doing something almost noble, preventing a nuclear monopoly, and with it, preventing what he feared could be a preemptive American strike on the Soviet Union while the US, that's U.S., still held sole possession of the bomb. He believed knowledge this dangerous belonged to humanity, not to one government's vault. It was a chillingly rational justification for an act of profound betrayal. And it's exactly why he was so effective and so hard to catch. Fuchs wasn't a bitter defector chasing riches. He was a true believer, hiding in plain sight, doing his job by day, and undermining his own government by night. Fuchs's first line into Soviet intelligence, sometime in 1941, ran through a German communist agent living undercover in Britain. A woman codenamed Sonia, real name Ursula Kaczynski, a major in Soviet military intelligence. From that point forward, Fuchs began quietly funneling information about Britain's atomic research to Moscow. In 1943, Britain and the United States merged their atomic efforts. The bomb project was no longer split across the Atlantic. It consolidated into one massive, secretive American undertaking known as the Manhattan Project. As part of that partnership, a group of British scientists, Fuchs among them, was sent to the United States. He first worked with a team in New York on the complex physics of uranium enrichment. Then, in August 1944, he got the transfer that would place him at the very heart of the atomic bomb's creation. Los Alamos, New Mexico. Los Alamos wasn't just a research facility. It was a hidden city, built on a remote mesa, ringed by armed guards and barbed wire, home to the greatest concentration of scientific genius the world had ever assembled in one place. Oppenheimer, Bethe, Teller, Feynman, Fermi, and now Klaus Fuchs walking among them, badge number K-22 clipped to his shirt, welcomed as one of their own. At Los Alamos, Fuchs worked in the theoretical division under Hans Bethe, one of the most respected physicists in the project. His specialty was implosion, the fiendishly difficult physics problem of compressing a plutonium core so evenly, so symmetrically, that it would achieve a perfect chain reaction in a fraction of a second. This wasn't a side project. This was the central engineering challenge behind Feynman, the plutonium bomb design that would later be dropped on Nagasaki. Fuchs wasn't on the outskirts of the Manhattan Project's most sensitive secrets. He was one of the people solving them. To understand just how devastating that made him, you have to understand how tightly the Manhattan Project was supposed to be locked down. The entire philosophy behind its secrecy was something called need to know. Even scientists inside Los Alamos were often kept in the dark about what colleagues in other divisions were doing, precisely so that no single person could ever hold the full picture in their head. It was a system designed, in theory, to make exactly what Fuchs did impossible. But Fuchs wasn't some outsider piecing together fragments from the edges. He was inside the theoretical division itself, one of the tiny handful of people who actually held the full picture. The compartmentalization that was supposed to protect the project's deepest secrets simply didn't apply to him, because his job required him to know everything. And he was careful, painfully, meticulously careful. He never carried notes out of Los Alamos in any traceable form. He memorized enormous amounts of technical detail and reconstructed it later, or wrote condensed summaries built to be passed quickly and destroyed. He varied his meeting spots. He never used the same routine twice if he could help it. Colleagues who worked beside him every day, brilliant men trained to notice inconsistency and error, never once suspected him. Even the security officers whose entire job was to catch exactly this kind of infiltration cleared him. Repeatedly, without hesitation. By every account from his colleagues, he fit right in. Quiet, a little reserved, but well-liked. He was a strong hiker and, surprisingly, a good dancer at the informal parties Los Alamos scientists threw to blow off steam in their isolated desert town. He became close friends with Richard Feynman. Yes, that Feynman, one of the most famous physicists of the 20th century. When Feynman's wife, Arlene, was dying of tuberculosis in an Albuquerque hospital, it was Klaus Fuchs who lent him his car, a beat-up, second-hand Buick, so Feynman could make the drive to see her. He babysat for colleagues' children. He was, by every measure of daily human interaction, one of the most trusted, most liked people at Los Alamos. And every few weeks, he was driving that same Buick into Santa Fe to hand over the secrets of the bomb. His contact was a man codenamed Raymond. Real name, Harry Gold, an American chemist working as a courier for Soviet intelligence. The meetings were simple, almost eerily mundane. Fuchs would drive into town, meet Gold on a street corner or a quiet spot along the road, and pass along pages of notes, calculations, sometimes detailed technical summaries of the project's progress. Gold would carry it onward, through a chain of handlers, until it eventually reached the desk of Lavrenti Beria, Stalin's ruthless intelligence chief, the man personally overseeing the Soviet Union's crash effort to build its own bomb. Through Fuchs, Beria received something extraordinarily rare in the history of espionage. Not just general knowledge that the Americans were building a bomb, but the actual physics behind how to build one. Details on implosion, estimates of the bomb's explosive yield. Fuchs was present at the Trinity test itself in July 1945, meaning he witnessed firsthand the birth of the nuclear age. And within weeks, that knowledge was on its way to Moscow. The Soviet atomic program, led by the physicist Igor Kurchatov, had been struggling, under-resourced, working with fragments of information and educated guesswork. What Fuchs provided didn't just save them time. It gave their scientists a validated roadmap, a way to skip years of costly trial and error because they now knew for certain what actually worked. Fuchs kept spying even after the war ended. He passed along information about the hydrogen bomb, the next, even more devastating leap in nuclear weapons technology, in 1946 and 1947. Years before the American public even knew such a weapon was seriously being considered. By this point, Fuchs had returned to Britain, taking a senior position at the Harwell Atomic Energy Research Establishment, Britain's own atomic research hub. He was now a rising star in British nuclear science, respected, trusted, moving through the highest levels of one of the most sensitive scientific institutions on Earth. And he was still spying. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb at a remote test site in Kazakhstan. The Western world was stunned. American intelligence had estimated the Soviets were years away, some analysts thought a decade, from developing their own bomb. The speed of it seemed almost impossible. What the public didn't know yet was that it wasn't entirely a mystery. Somewhere inside the most secure atomic facilities in the West, someone had been quietly handing over the answers. The unraveling had actually already begun, years before that first Soviet test, though almost nobody knew it. In a windowless room in Arlington, Virginia, a small team of American cryptanalysts had been working on one of the most difficult, painstaking intelligence projects of the era. A program called Venona, V-E-N-O-N-A. Their job, to decrypt old Soviet intelligence cables using flaws the Soviets had made in their own encryption system. Here's what made it possible. In theory, the Soviets used something called a one-time pad, an encryption method that is mathematically unbreakable provided each pad is used exactly once. But under the pressure of wartime demands, Soviet code clerks had reused some of those pads. That created a tiny mathematical crack in an otherwise impenetrable system. American and British cryptanalysts spent years pulling at that crack, decrypting fragments here, partial phrases there, slowly reconstructing messages that had been sent nearly a decade earlier. It wasn't until the late 1940s that analysts began recovering cable traffic clearly describing a highly placed source inside the Manhattan Project, one with access to Los Alamos itself. There was no name in the cables, just a code name and details about access and movement that intelligence officers had to match painstakingly against the list of scientists who had actually been there. Slowly, agonizingly, the list narrowed, and by late 1949 it had narrowed down to one man, Klaus Fuchs. In December 1949, an MI5 officer named William Scarden was assigned to interrogate him. Scarden was known for a particular skill, a calm, patient, almost gentle interrogation style that got confessions out of people who thought they had nothing to fear. The two men sat down for a series of conversations at Harwell. In the first meetings, Fuchs denied everything, composed, articulate, giving nothing away. But Scarden kept coming back, conversation after conversation, quietly working to build enough trust, or enough pressure, that Fuchs might finally crack. Then, in January 1950, during their fourth meeting, something shifted. Klaus Fuchs, the man who had spent nearly a decade betraying two governments while maintaining an unshakable public composure, finally broke. He confessed, not because he was cornered by hard evidence laid out in front of him, but because, by his own later account, he simply couldn't carry the weight of the double life any longer. He admitted he'd been spying for the Soviet Union since 1942. He admitted to passing along the deepest secrets of the atomic bomb project. And in his confession, he offered a justification that stunned his interrogators with its calm sincerity. He said he had never seen himself as a traitor. He believed, and would continue to believe for the rest of his life, that knowledge this dangerous should never belong exclusively to one nation. He was arrested on February 2nd, 1950. The news broke like a thunderclap. A trusted senior British atomic scientist, a man who had worked inside Los Alamos itself, had been secretly funneling nuclear secrets to Moscow for the better part of a decade. In the United States, the revelation sent shockwaves through an already anxious political climate, feeding directly into the rising fear of Soviet infiltration that would soon explode into the McCarthy era. Fuchs's confession also gave investigators the thread they needed to pull on. It led directly to the arrest of his courier, Harry Gold, which in turn led to other members of the same espionage network, including eventually Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, whose case would become one of the most infamous and controversial in American legal history. Fuchs's own trial was remarkably brief. He pleaded guilty to violating the Official Secrets Act. No dramatic courtroom battle. No extended defense. Because there was nothing left to argue. He had already told them everything. On March 1, 1950, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum penalty available under the law at the time. Some found the sentence shockingly light, given the scale of what he'd done. He had, after all, materially contributed to the Soviet Union acquiring the most destructive weapon in human history. But under British law as it stood, since Fuchs's espionage had been carried out for a wartime ally, rather than a wartime enemy, since the Soviet Union had fought alongside Britain against Hitler for most of that period, the legal charges available were narrower than many expected. Fuchs served his sentence quietly, notably remaining respected among physicists for his intellect, even as the world reeled from what he had done. His old mentor and friend Rudolf Peales, the man who had brought him into the British atomic program in the first place, who had welcomed him into his own home, visited him in prison. It said Peales, still trying to make sense of the betrayal, asked Fuchs directly why he had done it. Fuchs gave him the same answer he'd given his interrogators, that knowledge of atomic research shouldn't be the private property of any single country, but should belong to humanity as a whole. He was released in 1959, after serving 9 years of his 14-year sentence, freed early for good behavior. And here is where his story takes one final, remarkable turn. Britain stripped him of his citizenship. There was no future for him in the West. No laboratory that would ever trust him with sensitive work again. No life to rebuild among people who now knew exactly what he was capable of. So Klaus Fuchs did something almost unthinkable. He moved to East Germany, the communist state he had spent his life's greatest crime trying to empower. And there, astonishingly, he wasn't treated as a disgraced outcast. He was treated as a hero. The East German government welcomed him as a celebrated scientist and a loyal servant of the socialist cause. He was given a senior position at the Central Institute for Nuclear Research near Dresden, eventually rising to become its deputy director. He was elected to the East German Academy of Sciences. He received state honors. He married a fellow scientist, Greta Kielsen, and lived out the rest of his life not in hiding, not in shame, but in comfort and recognition, celebrated by the very system he had risked everything to strengthen. Think about the sheer strangeness of that outcome for a moment. This was a man who had spent 9 years in a British prison for one of the most serious breaches of national security in modern history. In the West, his name had become shorthand for betrayal, a cautionary tale taught in intelligence training for decades afterward. And yet he crossed into East Germany and simply resumed his life as a respected physicist, giving lectures, mentoring younger scientists, sitting on scientific committees. His past treated not as a stain but as a credential. For the East German state, Fuchs wasn't a criminal. He was proof their system could attract loyalty from the very best minds the West had to offer. He became something close to a living propaganda symbol, even as he mostly kept a low, quiet profile, doing the same kind of patient, meticulous scientific work that had defined his entire career. He gave a small number of interviews over the years, always careful, always measured, never quite performing the regret his interviewers seemed to expect from him. When pressed on whether he had any doubts about what he'd done, he tended to return to the same core belief he'd held since his 20s. That unchecked power, wherever it resided, was the real danger, and that balance between two flawed superpowers was safer than dominance by either one alone. Whether history has vindicated that belief or condemned it is something people are still arguing about. Klaus Fuchs died on January 28, 1988 in East Berlin, just over a year before the Berlin Wall would fall, and the communist system he dedicated his life to would begin to collapse entirely. He never expressed public regret. He never renounced what he'd done. To the very end, he seemed to genuinely believe his actions, whatever laws they broke, whatever trust they shattered, had served a greater purpose, preventing one nation from holding unchecked power over the fate of the entire world. Fuchs was not alone. In the years after his arrest, investigators uncovered an entire network of sources feeding atomic secrets to Moscow, from Ted Hall, a 19-year-old physicist at Los Alamos who volunteered information out of his own ideological conviction, to Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, executed for their role in the same broader espionage effort. But among all of them, Fuchs stands apart, because of the sheer depth and technical precision of what he provided. Hall was young, and by most accounts, somewhat peripheral to the bomb's hardest engineering problems. The Rosenberg's contribution, while politically explosive, was arguably less technically significant than the courts and the press portrayed it to be. Fuchs, by contrast, was a senior, trusted physicist working at the absolute center of implosion research, the specific technical problem that made a plutonium bomb possible at all. If any single spy handed Stalin the blueprint, it was him, and the consequences didn't end in 1949. The moment the Soviet Union detonated its own bomb, the entire logic of the Cold War shifted. American officials, stunned by how quickly Moscow had caught up, accelerated their own weapons development in response, pushing forward with the far more powerful hydrogen bomb, specifically because they believed, correctly thanks in part to Fuchs, that the Soviets were racing toward the same technology. What followed was decades of nuclear buildup, a spiraling arms race that shaped the politics, the economics, and the constant undercurrent of existential fear that defined the second half of the 20th century. It's not an exaggeration to say the world millions of people grew up in, one shadowed by the possibility of nuclear annihilation, was shaped, in part, by a series of quiet meetings on street corners in New Mexico, between a physicist and a chemist working as a courier. Historians still debate exactly how much Fuchs's espionage accelerated the Soviet bomb program. Some argue it saved the Soviets a year or two of research. Others argue the acceleration was even more significant, given how directly his information validated the design choices Soviet scientists were already pursuing. What's not up for debate is the scale of what he had access to, and the scale of what he handed away. He wasn't a low-level clerk who overheard something in a hallway. He was one of the physicists actually solving the hardest problems inside the Manhattan Project, sitting in the room where the most dangerous secrets of the 20th century were being written down for the very first time. What makes Klaus Fuchs such an unsettling figure in history isn't that he was a monster, or a mercenary, or a man twisted by greed. It's that he wasn't any of those things. He was a brilliant, principled, deeply convinced idealist who believed he was doing the right thing, even as he committed what many would call the greatest act of espionage in the history of science. He looked his closest friends and colleagues in the eye for years, lent them his car, babysat their children, danced at their parties, and the entire time carried a secret that would help usher in the nuclear arms race that defined the rest of the 20th century. In the end, the story of Klaus Fuchs isn't really about atomic secrets at all. It's about how a person can hold two completely contradictory truths inside themselves at once. Genuine warmth and total betrayal. Brilliant integrity in the laboratory and total deception outside of it. He believed he was saving the world by giving it balance. Instead, he helped launch it into the most dangerous arms race humanity has ever known. One that, in many ways, we are still living inside of today.